Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. You're very welcome to this Hachette Learning webinar. We'd love to know where you're joining us from, so please do pop it in the chat. I'm in York in the UK on a rare sunny day today. The session is being recorded and we will send a link to the recording within 1 week of the webinar. Feel free to share it far and wide with any of your colleagues who may benefit from the information in the session today. Please note, however, that this event is not an official Cambridge International event, and therefore the views and messages shared are not representative of Cambridge International. The session is to introduce changes to the O-level and IGCSE economics courses and how Hachette Learning have developed products to support teachers with those changes. Little bit of housekeeping. Make sure that if you want to put a message in the chat box, you select all participants. Feel free to put in any questions as the session is running. I will be in the chat box to help with any technical issues. Although we do find that if you leave the room and come back, that tends to sort out most problems. But if there's anything else, pop a message in there for me. For questions about the session itself, Paul, Margaret and the team from Hachette Learning will answer your questions when they can. We have got some time at the end to focus on any of those questions, so do put them in. Please don't share your email in the chat. This is for data protection purposes. That's all I have to say. Hope you enjoy this Hachette Learning webinar, and I will pass over directly to today's speakers, Paul and Margaret. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. We can get to the next slide, please. All right, good afternoon and good evening to everybody, depending which part of the world you're joining us from. So we've got 4 things to really get through today. So I'll be doing the first session, which is really looking at the main changes to the contents of the syllabus. And then I'll hand over to my co-author, Margaret, who will talk to you about the changes to the assessment and also about how some of the learning resources that we've developed can help you with this new course. And then there are opportunities for questions and answers throughout as well. So if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to type them in. Emily will collate them and then we'll try to address them towards the end. All right. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so what's changed? What's changed and what's not changed? So you'll see in bullet point 1, one of the big themes with Cambridge is they've introduced environmental sustainability now as a key topic throughout all of the units. So more about that later on. As with any new syllabus change, some things have been added, some things have been removed. So we'll go through those just so that you know and you're comfortable and prepared for August 2025. Okay, the assessment objectives are more or less the same, but they have been cleared up in certain sections of the syllabus. I'll give you some examples later on, but they're much better for us as teachers. Greater emphasis on AO1, knowledge and understanding, less so on economic analysis and evaluation. So that doesn't make the course any easier, but I think it does make the course a little bit more approachable to students. And there's a big difference between approachable and the difficulty itself. Okay. Next slide, please, Emily. Okay. All right, so what's not changed then? So let's have a look at this. I'll give you some reassurances. The 6 big topics are the same. So if you've taught this course before, you'll recognize those 6 big topics. So they remain the same. The assessments also remain the same. So paper 1 is still multiple choice. Paper 2 is still the structured questions. But Margaret will go through with you later on what actually has changed within paper 1 and paper 2. Okay. All right, so let's start off with what's been removed from the syllabus, and then I'll go on to what's been added. So you'll notice that there are some subtle changes, and then there are some big changes as well. So we have to be really careful. We're using old resources, things like textbooks or things like old exam papers. So bullet point 1, we've got the mobility of factors of production removed now. However, there's an asterisk you can see at the bottom. That only applies to land, capital and enterprise. So the mobility of labour is still in the syllabus. It's just in a different section. So where you see legacy, we're referring to the outgoing or the old syllabus rather than the new syllabus. Strangely, you might think, microeconomics and macroeconomics have been removed from the syllabus. It's very likely, pragmatically, when you're teaching, you'll still be using both those terms, but Cambridge will no longer be asking for things like definitions of, to define macroeconomics. The third bullet point, implications of price elasticity of supply for decision making, that's been removed as well. So we still have definitions, calculations, and determinants of PES, but not the implications of PES for those stakeholder groups. Trade unions pretty much largely completely removed. So I'll come back to that later on when we look at what's been added. Growth of firms, so that's the internal, methods of internal and external growth, that's been removed. So no need to teach that anymore. And principles of taxation, so that's what makes a good tax. That's also been completely removed from the syllabus. All right, so far quite a lot of changes there. We go to the next slide, more removals. So the first bullet point here, that's about the shift from primary to secondary to tertiary industry as an economy develops, or more women into the workforce, and the shift from public sector rather to private sector as an economy develops. That's been completely removed. So no need to teach that anymore. The claimant count for unemployment has been removed. So we're now only teaching the labour force survey method. You'll notice in the next one, interestingly, all of that for deflation has been removed. We only teach the definition of deflation now, so no need to do the measurements, causes and consequences anymore. GDP per capita has been removed. We still have real GDP as the single measure of economic growth in the syllabus, but GDP per capita has been removed. It's still in the syllabus in another section, but that's more to measure standards of living. Population pyramids, fixed exchange rates, completely gone. So no need to teach those topics anymore. Okay. All right, so with all those removals, obviously things must be added. So some of these additions are quite subtle, some are quite big. So I'll go through them with you just so that you're prepared to teach this in the new academic year. So quite surprisingly, I had to double check this several times. The word scarcity doesn't appear in the legacy syllabus. The word scarce does, scarce resource, but not scarcity. So that's now explicit in the new guide. And you might question, why would an economics qualification not have that word or that concept in the syllabus? So it's now explicit, so students can be asked to define scarcity, for example. And you probably taught the fundamental economic questions in the legacy guide as well, but those are now explicitly added. So the what, how, and for whom production should take place. Okay. All right, now when you're looking at the new guide, please be really careful because the wording has changed. And sometimes, especially if you're like me, if you've taught the course for a little while, you've got some unlearning and relearning to do. So we might look at the new syllabus. Oh yeah, that all looks very familiar, looks like the previous syllabus, but they're actually quite different. So in the new syllabus, we're now looking at the definition of a market, not a market economic system. You're looking at examples of markets. So for example, markets of goods or markets for services, and the role of buyers and sellers in markets rather than the market system. So the price mechanism is in the new syllabus, it's just in a different section. So for this particular section of how markets work, we're not looking at the price mechanism. Okay. In the sections for elasticity of supply and demand, for the calculations, Cambridge have now added those 3 new extreme measures. So we've just included in the books the diagrams just to help students to comprehend these quite abstract concepts. Okay, subtle changes. Now, when you're looking at the syllabus, again, for those of you who've been teaching the course for a while, you've been teaching this, you know about the significance of PED for consumers, for firms, and for governments. But the exam board, Cambridge, have now added a 4th stakeholder group, so workers. So how might workers use PED or knowledge of PED in wage negotiations, for example. So watch out for that subtle change. Okay. And again, another subtle change. We're already talking about 9 different key terms linked to market failure. Cambridge have added a 10th one for us, monopoly. I think this is a very good change because we've had abuse of monopoly power in the syllabus for quite a long time now. So it makes sense to have the definition of monopoly in the new guide as well. Okay. So we've got case studies in the book just to help students understand these different reasons for market failure. So linked to the previous slide, we now have consequences of market failure with 2 additional learning outcomes. So one of them is the non-provision of public goods. So we've got case studies like the lack of flood control systems in Bangladesh, because as you know, in the private sector, in the free market economic system, governments don't exist to provide these public goods. And then we've got monopoly again. So the implications of monopoly power or abuse of monopoly power because of market failure. Okay. Now, earlier on I mentioned about the guide having clearer learning outcomes. So here's an example. So in the legacy, the outgoing guide, you can see the compare and contrast table here. You've got definitions of the mixed economic system, and you've got government interventionist measures to address these market failures, those 10 market failures we looked at earlier on. So what we now have in the guide is an additional section, learning outcome, to the arguments for and against the mixed market economic system. So not why does the government just intervene? So what are the reasons for that intervention in the first place? And without understanding the arguments for and against the market, the mixed economic system, the latter learning outcome wouldn't make as much sense for students. Okay, so I think that's clearer in the new guide. This is an interesting addition as well. So influences on household spending, savings and borrowing. The exam board have added 2 more factors there: age affecting our spending and saving habits, and also culture. And I think the inclusion of culture is a good one because it really does make the qualification a little bit more international. So the I in IGCSE. So cultural aspects of demand and supply. Okay, so earlier on I talked about trade unions. Trade unions largely removed from the syllabus, as we mentioned. So you can see on the left-hand side, currently students need to define trade unions, explain the role of trade unions and the advantages and disadvantages of trade union activity. That all disappears in the new syllabus. However, it's up to you. You're going to have to use your professional judgment when you deliver this new Unit 3.3 on workers. So you can see here the learning outcome is trade unions and their relative bargaining power. So pragmatically, can we really teach that learning outcome without defining what trade unions are, explaining the role of trade unions and perhaps their advantages and disadvantages? So that's a professional call. You know your students best. What we can't do is overteach because, as you'll see, lots of things have been added to the syllabus and we might run out of time. However, in all cases, sorry, Emily, can you just go back? In all cases, your students will no longer be asked in the new syllabus to define trade unions or to explain an advantage and a disadvantage of trade unions. Okay, it's just their role in wage negotiations. All right, next slide, please, Emily. Okay, now you saw the inclusion of environmental sustainability as a theme added to the new syllabus. So this has been added here, for example, in Unit 4. So this is now a 6th macroeconomic objective of government. So you've got your traditional ones, so economic growth, low unemployment, low inflation, balance of payments, redistribution of income and wealth. We now have environmental sustainability. Okay, so we've got definitions, case studies and activities in the new book just to help you with these new learning objectives. Okay, earlier on I mentioned the guide being much clearer on learning outcomes. So here's an example. Here's a really good example. The reasons for taxation. We currently teach this, but in the current guide, it just says the reasons for taxation. It doesn't tell us what those reasons are beyond raising government revenue. So here you can see that the syllabus is now specifying the parameters of what we need to teach. So I think that's a good thing because that allows us to plan our resources and our delivery far better than before. Okay. Subtle changes again. So supply side policies, they now include infrastructure spending. So watch out for that. If we're using over resources, we might miss that one out. And the worst case scenario, the exams come up, that's the question that comes up for our students. So we've got case studies, for example, this one here, which is where Margaret works, the UAE, about their spending on the rail networks and how that helps with things like reduced carbon emissions and improved productivity. Okay, the next one here, I think this is also good clarification for us. In the past, we taught the meaning of a recession, we drew diagrams of PC diagrams. That's very abstract to a 14 or 15-year-old student, not really understanding the reasons for recession. So that's now listed very clearly in the guide. So a decrease in total demand. So many of us might use the term aggregate demand. So that's not explicit in the guide, but Cambridge does refer to that as total demand. So the parameters are there again. And similarly, rather than just talking about points within the PPC as a consequence of recession, which is very, again, abstract to a teenager, Cambridge has now said, okay, let's talk about what the implications are for these stakeholder groups. So the stakeholder impact of a recession. Okay, so I think that's a far better learning outcome for our learners. Okay, another subtle change. Seasonal unemployment has been added into the syllabus. So again, watch out if you're using over resources, you won't see seasonal unemployment in there. That could be the first exam question that comes up in 2027. Okay, more subtle changes. So causes of poverty, you can see they've highlighted there for you. Environmental factors now as a factor of a cause of poverty. So that might link to case studies like we talked about earlier on. Countries like Bangladesh, many of sections of Bangladesh being below sea level, prone to flooding and so forth. So that's an environmental factor that might cause poverty. And then you've got policies to alleviate poverty. So we've got improved healthcare provision added in there as well. Okay, natural resources. Now, if you're using the very first version of the syllabus that Cambridge released, they actually called that environmental resources. In the final version of the syllabus, they've changed it to natural resources because I think that's the term that most of us probably refer to. All right, so natural resources, environmental resources meaning the same thing. Okay. Quite surprisingly, the definition of free trade was not in the previous guide. It is now explicit. So again, students can be asked to define free trade. Watch out for that, for your second language, third language speakers. Free trade sounds like an oxymoron. So sometimes the language we use in the classroom, it may be a bit challenging for our students in the classroom. So watch out for things like unemployed workers, free trade. It might mean very little to our students. Previously, we looked at the benefits of free trade, but we didn't look at the disadvantages. So it's now explicit in the guide, the disadvantages of free trade, not just the benefits of. Okay. Right, this is the big change. So as we're approaching the end of the syllabus, section 6, we're thinking we're almost there, not much more to teach. Then Cambridge add this new section in for us. In the outgoing guide, the title of Unit 6 is International Trade and Globalization. But the only thing we learn about globalization, the legacy guide, is the definition. So in the new guide, they still call it International Trade and Globalization, but you can see there, it's a much bigger section. So please allow enough time to teach the content there, causes and consequences of changes in globalization, and the effects of these changes on those things there, including the environment. Okay. All right, almost there for all the additions. So I just see somebody just popped up a question. Is the new guide available on the website? It is, yes. It's now available on the Cambridge website. All right, so carrying with Unit 6, so 4 additional reasons for trade protection have been added into the guide. They've also added in sunset and sunrise as alternative terminology to infant industries and declining industries. So what that's telling us is that Cambridge may in 1 year talk about or use the term sunrise rather than infant industries. Okay, so watch out for that little change, but 4 new additional reasons for trade protection added, so make sure you teach those. Okay, I think this is the penultimate slide for me. All right, so this is another new addition. So we've never taught this before, reasons for buying and selling foreign currencies. So make sure you address those learning outcomes, but at least the good thing is Cambridge have told us what the parameters are. Those are the things, or the reasons rather, for buying and selling foreign currencies. Okay. Someone else has just popped up a question. So everything we're talking about is only for first exams 2027. So it won't be for 2026 candidates. All right. And this is the last slide I've got before I hand over to Margaret to talk about assessment changes. Again, you might already be teaching this, but this is now explicit in the guide. So fixed exchange rates have been removed from the guide. So we no longer teach fixed exchange rates. We're only teaching floating exchange rates. So Cambridge have now added those two terms, appreciation and depreciation, just to clarify we're teaching floating exchange rates only. All right. So if you have any questions about changes to the contents of the curriculum, please feel free to type them into the chat. Emily will collate them and then we'll try to address them towards the end of the webinar. All right. So I'm going to hand over to Margaret now just to talk about assessment.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So first of all, this slide contains the changes overall with both papers. You will see on the last 2 columns, one of the major changes to the assessment objectives is there's only 10% now overall for evaluation compared to 20% at the moment. And it just shows there's been a greater emphasis on knowledge and understanding and on analysis. And I'll go through each paper separately, but paper 2 is where most of the changes are. So as you can see there, it's only 15% now in the new paper 2 for evaluation as compared to 30% in the legacy paper. Can I have the next slide, please, Emily? Okay, so paper 1, what's changed in paper 1? Well, it's still a multiple choice paper, but as you can see, there are now 40 questions. So there's been an increase in 10 multiple choice questions. And as a consequence of that, the paper's now an hour long instead of 45 minutes currently. But the minutes per mark and the weighting of the paper at 30% of the total marks remains the same. Could I have the next slide, please? So paper 2, this is now an overview of what's changed overall in paper 2. You'll find most of the changes actually, and I will go through each section separately, but section A, which is the compulsory question, is only going to be 20 marks instead of 30. Section B is the same, it's 60 marks and students answer 3 questions out of 4. And so the big change again there is the exam is now only 2 hours instead of 2 hours, 15 minutes. So paper 2 will still be worth 70% of the marks and the minutes per mark are 1.5 minutes per mark, but there are changes. It's now has less marks than previously. Okay, next slide, please. So if we look at section A, this is what's changed. So currently calculation marks are worth only 1 mark. So this is now, they're now going to be worth 2 marks. The analysed question is only going to be worth 4 marks. Currently it's worth 5 marks. And they have removed 1 4-mark explain question and 1 6-mark discuss questions. So overall, that reduces the total marks for section A. So the compulsory structured question is 10 marks less than the legacy paper. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll just go through the sort of slight changes that I found. So the calculation question is now worth 2 marks. So the mark scheme, basically students can get 2 marks for a correct answer with or without workings. The mark scheme's quite clear to say that if a calculate question requires working, it will be explicit in the question. And students can now attract 1 mark for using the correct method, but getting an incorrect answer. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, identify questions are pretty similar, and I know it's pretty similar there of current mark scheme. So they get 1 mark for each correct answer identified. Obviously in section A, it's contextual. They must use the context of the question. So if the country is mentioned, the examples must come from the source material. And if students give more than 2 examples, the marker will only consider the first 3. So that's worth reminding students. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this is a bit, I think this criteria, the revised criteria for the analysed question, so we're on paper 2, section A, the marks are now less, and I think this makes it a little bit more straightforward for students. So at the moment, and I'm aware that you know this, students have to, it's always based on data, this question, and they have to address the expected relationship or outcome. They've got to offer evidence to support the expected relationship or outcome. They also have to highlight any exceptions and analyse the overall data. So it's actually quite a lot for 5 marks. Now, if you just look at the left-hand column, in the new syllabus, they get a mark for the expected outcome and then up to 2 marks for supporting that with evidence and up to 2 marks for analysis of the expected relationship or outcome. So the sample assessment materials suggest that exceptions are no longer essential. So they can just identify the relationship, support it with evidence, and analyse it and get 4 marks. So I think that's a good development. The mark scheme goes on to say if they do recognise an exception, they get a mark for the exception, again a mark for evidence and a mark for analysis. And obviously it implies there they'd have to have identified the expected relationship in the first place. But I think that makes that question a little bit more straightforward. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so that was section A. So what's changed in paper 2, section B? Well, to be honest, not an awful lot has changed really here. Interestingly, the wordings, the instructions at the top of the current section B, it states that each question is introduced by stimulus material. In your answer, you may refer to this material and or to other examples that you've studied. Now, that's no longer there. They've taken that away. So there's less emphasis, I suppose, on using the stimulus material. It then just gives the instruction, as always, that students are to answer 3 out of 4 questions. Okay, could you have the next slide, please? Okay, so explain questions in section B of paper 2 are 4 marks. Again, it's 1 mark for identification, 1 mark for explanation. Students might do this twice, depending on the question. And sometimes it asks for 2 reasons or to explain 2 reasons or 2 causes. Again, if a student does more than 2, the examiner will only mark or read the first 3. Okay, all right. So analyse questions on this paper for 6 marks is very, very similar. You know, identifying a point with 2 further development points, or actually a student could identify a point and have 5 chains of reasoning to get 6 marks. So that actually is very similar to, is the same as the current paper, current syllabus. Okay. And the very, very last question, the discuss, it's still 8 marks. It still requires students to consider 2 sides of an economic argument, using economic information and giving clear and logical analysis. So really the assessment criteria is just a simplified version of the current legacy criteria. It seems to be, so that question there has just popped up. Is it compulsory to provide a conclusion? The mark schemes do not suggest a conclusion. They suggest a balanced argument that has, and like you can see there in the middle paragraph, one side of the argument may have more depth than another, but overall both sides are considered and developed. The extra bit there says it may also point out possible uncertainties of alternative decisions and outcomes. It doesn't anywhere in the criteria suggest that a conclusion needs to be given. So if you just look at the last slide, please, in my section, again, the orange is a lot simpler, but it's basically saying the same thing as previously. So I think to aid student understanding and aid teacher marking and interpretation, it seems a little bit more straightforward for students and teachers. Okay, so just to summarise, the major changes are paper 1 is now 40 multiple choice questions instead of 30, and it's now an hour long. And paper 2 is now 80 marks instead of 90 and is now 2 hours long. Okay, all right, that's the end of my section.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, so again, if you've got questions about the assessment, keep them coming into the chat, and then we'll try to address those for you at the end as well. All right. About a week ago, Margaret and I received a message from an ex-colleague just asking, is this course getting easier because there are 10 additional multiple choice questions minus 10 marks in paper 2. It makes the course accessible, but not necessarily easier. Those multiple choice questions are not actually that easy, so especially for your second language speakers. So it just allows Cambridge to cover more exam content in one exam session. And 2 hours 15 for paper 2 is actually a really long exam. It's actually longer than some of the A-level or IB exams that older students take as well. Okay. All right, so we're just going to talk very briefly about how our new resources may help you then with delivering this new course, and then we'll move on to Q&A after. So we've developed our 3rd edition textbook with the publishers. That's been fully endorsed by Cambridge. They've checked all the units to make sure that all the activities and questions align with the new syllabus. So that was available at the end of March. The new workbook 3rd edition was published about 2 weeks ago, and that's got additional exam questions. And I think the answers for both publications are available free of charge. The link is on the back of the books as well. Okay. So in the book, we've got lots of visuals just to help students. I'm a visual learner myself, so I like diagrams. I like images to help me remember things. We've got classroom activities with recommended suggested answers there. Revision checklists, so when your students are revising prior to a test, a mock exam or the actual exams, the revision checklist is just kind of like a go-to place. They don't need to read the whole chapter, so it's a little bit more comprehensive but concise for them. And chapter review questions to help them test their understanding. Okay. We can go to the next slide, please, Emily. So again, we've got paper 1 questions. These have been updated for the new syllabus. Paper 2, structured questions, study tips. So those are like exam tips for students. Lots of international case studies to make economics come alive for our students. And this is basically a summary of what's in the new 3rd edition textbook. I'm not sure, Emily or Alison, how our participants might to get a sample chapter. It's hyperlinked there, but obviously they can't hyperlink it from a video.
We'll pop one in the box, yeah. Okay,
great. All right, so if you'd like to get a sample chapter of the textbook, the new textbook, Emily will help you provide you with the link there. And there's only so much that can go into a textbook, a physical textbook, before it doesn't fold. So on the next slide, we've got a teacher's guide, and you can see there some of the resources that are included in that teacher guide. And I guess Emily can also put in the link for those of you who might be interested in that resource as well. Okay, so quite a lot of those resources are digital, so we're not bound by the the physical nature of textbook folding. Okay, I think that then leads us to Q&A. So if you have questions, please let us know and we'll try our best to address them.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Margaret. Yes, please do keep your questions coming. I think you've managed to answer most of them as you were going, which was great. Thank you both. We have one question from Alfred, though, which is an opinion of teaching the new syllabus compared to the previous one. Any opinions on that?
Personally, I like most of the changes. I think the environmental aspect is important. It's the way society is obviously going, climate change and so forth. So, before we started this session, Margaret was saying, she's got to turn on her aircon. It's 40 degrees where she is. And Emily was saying, on a rare sunny day, but we're getting more sunny days in the UK. I think including the economic sustainability aspect in there is really good. If you're teaching A-level already, Cambridge A-level or IB economics, that's already in them, in those syllabuses anyway. So this actually better prepares the students, I think, for the next journey in economics if they choose that path. I don't know if Margaret agrees or disagrees.
Anything to add, Margaret?
My understanding of the mark scheme is it doesn't require a conclusion. It is a balanced answer, and just trying to achieve that balance. And it's all about the chains of reasoning, so developing points that have been made.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the Cambridge exam papers, they structure it as in the reasons for example, globalization, whatever it might be, the arguments against, and they don't leave a box for conclusion. So contrary to what we might teach students in terms of writing an extended response essay question, they don't need a conclusion to get maximum marks. I mean, that obviously changes with A-levels and IB.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great to have that insight into the other qualifications as well. Thank you for that. Kenny is asking about when the resources will be available in Malaysia. They should be available now, Kenny, but we'll put you in touch with the local education consultant there, so you can find out. Thank you for your interest. We've got another question about the grade threshold. Will there be significant change in grade threshold?
That has to remain to be seen, because obviously they use what's called a bell curve distribution, normal distribution for the grades. They will stay more or less the same in terms of percentages. Like Margaret showed, the weighting of the papers are exactly the same. So it's still 70% for paper 2 and 30% for paper 1. So until the first exam session has actually taken place in May 27, we won't know what the grade thresholds are. It's probably pragmatic to use the current ones for the time being, but they're not going to change drastically, no.
Great, thank you for that. One more just come in. What weightage do diagrams carry in the new syllabus? Is it compulsory for questions?
I think it depends on the demands of the question. So, if they're asking, and in the new syllabus, it will tell the students and teachers, of course, where diagrams are required. So, for example, the national minimum wage diagram is now explicit in the new guide. So they may be asked to draw a minimum wage diagram. They may be given a minimum wage diagram and asked to interpret it. So it's very hard to answer, what's the weighting for diagrams. It's not quite like in economics where, in IB economics, sorry, where there's huge weighting for diagrams in all the papers. It doesn't work like that in Cambridge IGCSE. So it really depends on the demands of the question. But the new guide definitely tells us where to teach which diagrams.
I was just going to add to that one, following on from your minimum wage, Paul. In the sample assessment material, one of the question is about a minimum price and a maximum price. Now, the mark scheme, I think it's an analysis question, and the mark scheme allows students, they can use words to explain what a minimum and a maximum price is, or they can use a diagram and get credit for it. But actually there's lots and lots of diagram questions in the multiple choice paper, as you know, but the only time in diagrams, it tends to be a demand and supply, doesn't it? Paper 2, section A, there's always a 6-mark question about diagrams. So, or 4 mark question, sorry.
4 mark.
Yeah.
So, you know, unlike A-level, unlike IB, our students don't have too many diagrams, and certainly there are no diagrams for market failure, for example. So don't teach any diagrams that we would for post-16 qualifications.
Okay, great. And speaking of that, you have a lovely comment in the chat asking Paul if you have any plans to author one of our AS or A-level books in the future. Maybe something to talk to Alison about later.
Depends if Margaret and I have capacity, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. It's great to know that that your books are appreciated by the people here. It's great to hear that.
Thank you.
Agri, you've asked a question about the subscription length of the digital product. Yeah, we can put you in touch with your local education consultant who can support you with that. And I know that Vicky has put the link in the box for you to view the sample. Some issues, there's a new link just gone in, so try that new link to get more information. But the books are available in e-version. Yeah. Those I think are most of the questions that have come in. A question if you know of any relevant teacher certification program for economics. I don't know if that's within the scope of this webinar, but if either of you have any advice for a teacher.
Margaret might know, because Margaret did some teacher training for Cambridge recently-ish.
It was a little while ago. Cambridge does provide training for teachers. There is lots of training explicitly for their courses that are on offer. Sometimes face-to-face, sometimes digitally. I guess it will be on their website, be on the Cambridge website, I believe.
Yeah, thank you for that. If there aren't any other questions, I think we do have just a request from Alison, who is the product manager for this. Is she there? There you are, Alison. Great.
I'm here. Yes, that's right. Yes. If you could just go to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you so much to Paul and Margaret for that. I'm Alison Schrecker, the lead product manager with responsibility for this new Cambridge IGCSE publishing. Now that the student books and teacher guides and workbook are out, we're looking at how we can support students with study, review and exam preparation and practice. So we'd be really grateful for your input to help us develop new resources for this. Please do fill out this short survey. There's a QR code on screen, or I think my colleague will be putting a link to the survey in the chat. Or please do email me directly if you're interested in collaborating with us, or any other thoughts on any of our economics publishing. Thank you very much indeed. And back over to Emily.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And just thanks again to Paul and for Margaret for joining us today. You've had lots of love in the chat for the clarity of the information you've provided. So yeah, what a great breakdown of what teachers have to look out for in this next exam period. Just to confirm, this is the first examination in 2027, right? That came up as another question again. So just to confirm. Otherwise, thank you all for coming and joining us today. It was great to have so many of you from all over the world joining, so just about every continent represented here. And it's always lovely to see everybody joining us. We will be sending out the recording for the webinar within the next week. So look out for that from my colleague. And as Alison says, please do get in touch with any feedback on this session or on our products. We'd love to hear from you. That's it. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll stop the recording and just wish you all the best for today and the rest of the week. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Hachette Learning webinar.